Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a highly professional clinical evaluation of how our aquatic dietary choices profoundly impact the aging brain, the cardiovascular system, and the musculoskeletal framework. We are going to strictly focus on the scientific data here, examining the precise physiological effects these choices have on older adults.
Now, consider this rather alarming baseline statistic for a moment. A 2019 study highlighted in the source material reveals that specific, and actually quite commonly recommended dietary choices can spike the risk of stroke and memory decline by nearly 79% in older populations. This tells us that silent, cumulative physiological harm is often occurring long before any early symptoms ever appear.
To navigate this critical data, we will be following a strict pathological versus therapeutic approach today. We'll start by establishing baseline geriatric vulnerabilities, then examine the severe pathological profiles of methylmercury bioaccumulation and systemic inflammation. From there, we'll pivot to therapeutic interventions for neuroprotection and sarcopenia before finally wrapping up with highly practical, evidence-based dietary protocols.
Let's begin by establishing those physiological baselines in populations over the age of 60. What exactly are the underlying nutritional vulnerabilities here?
Well, a fundamental biological shift occurs as we age. Because our natural detoxification systems slow down significantly past age 60, heavy metals and environmental toxins that a younger body might process quite efficiently suddenly become dangerous accumulative burdens. Essentially, the aging immune system transforms what might be considered a moderate toxic load into a severe clinical hazard.
With that vulnerability established, let's look at our first pathological profile, methylmercury bioaccumulation, and its direct role in neurological and cardiovascular degradation.
This is a primary driver of neurological decline. Methylmercury bioaccumulation is exactly what it sounds like: the systemic buildup of toxic mercury compounds in human tissue over a lifetime. Large predator fish like swordfish and Gulf of Mexico tilefish concentrate decades of these toxins. When an older adult ingests them, that mercury directly targets the nervous system. It also disrupts myocardial electrical signals, which drastically ramps up oxidative stress and can lead to severe arrhythmias.
The measurable clinical outcomes here are frankly severe. The source highlights a fascinating JAMA neurology study demonstrating that seniors who had higher mercury levels simply from the regular consumption of popular albacore or big eye tuna faced up to a 65% higher risk of cognitive decline. This toxic accumulation heavily accelerates neurological decay, effectively mimicking early dementia.
Identifying these primary vectors is absolutely crucial. The source outlines 4 clinical case studies in what to strictly avoid. First, swordfish, which acts as a high-concentration apex predator. Next, Gulf of Mexico tilefish, carrying extreme toxicity levels that can exceed safe weekly limits in just a single serving. Then we have large tuna, specifically albacore and big eye varieties. And finally, generic canned tuna, which poses immense neurotoxic risks through a cumulative daily exposure. A 2021 neurotoxicology study actually linked these exact vectors to measurable physical shrinkage in the brain's memory centers, alongside severe executive dysfunction.
Now, let's move to our next pathological profile. We need to examine systemic inflammation and the profound physiological impact of imbalanced lipids.
Specifically, we're looking at inflammation driven by heavily commercialized aquaculture. Look at this stark physiological contrast. The optimal human dietary ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids is roughly 1:1, maybe 2:1. But in sharp contrast, farmed tilapia can present a highly pathological ratio of up to 11:1. This is a direct result of these farmed populations being fed highly inflammatory fillers like corn, soy, and agricultural waste.
Consuming this extensively farmed fish also introduces heavy antibiotics and dioxins, toxic industrial chemicals that heavily damage an already vulnerable aging immune system. Physiologically speaking, this skewed lipid profile acts as a biological catalyst. It elevates inflammatory markers to a degree that often yields worse clinical profiles than eating processed red meats, aggressively fueling arthritis, metabolic dysfunction, and Alzheimer's progression.
So, with a pathological danger so clearly defined by the literature, we have to ask an essential clinical question. What targeted, evidence-based dietary interventions actually mitigate these neurological and cardiovascular risks while actively supporting physiological longevity?
This brings us to the therapeutic side of the equation, specifically looking at neuroprotective lipids and how EPA and DHA effectively mitigate oxidative stress.
Let's examine this therapeutic profile. Introducing options like Arctic char, sardines, and U.S.-raised rainbow trout provides clinical-grade EPA and DHA. These clean, potent omega-3s act essentially as natural firefighters for the cardiovascular system. They actively cool systemic inflammation, protect endothelial function, and shield our cellular architecture from damaging oxidative stress.
And the clinical efficacy of these pure cold water lipids is truly remarkable. For example, a 2021 study in the Journal of Nutritional Science tracked adults over 65 who consumed Arctic char twice a week for 12 weeks. The result? They recorded a highly significant 22% drop in systemic inflammation, alongside greatly improved triglyceride levels. These therapeutic sources are actively neutralizing the very inflammatory compounds that drive joint degradation.
Advancing from the neurological and cardiovascular, let's shift our focus to the musculoskeletal system and look at therapeutic interventions for preventing sarcopenia.
Sarcopenia is defined as the age-related, involuntary loss of skeletal muscle mass and functional strength. It is a massive clinical issue, acting as a primary precipitating factor for physical frailty in nearly half of individuals over the age of 80. To prevent this severe loss of physical independence, the aging body requires high-yield, easily digestible protein that is completely devoid of the pathological burden of heavy metals we discussed earlier.
This is where wild-caught Pacific cod presents a truly optimal macronutritional profile. Just a single serving delivers an impressive 40 grams of complete protein with under 2 grams of fat. Furthermore, it supplies essential dietary selenium, which is absolutely necessary to support optimal thyroid function, combat oxidative stress, and reinforce immune resilience. Similarly, wild-caught Alaskan pollock operates as an unsung, incredibly undervalued therapeutic asset for aging physiology. Because it has a short lifespan in the cold Bering Sea, it boasts some of the lowest mercury levels available, offering very clean, reliable cellular support. It's actually endorsed by the FDA and EPA as a top-tier choice for frequent consumption. It delivers highly absorbable vitamin B12 for cognitive stability, while its lean texture ensures gentle gastric processing.
So we arrive at the clinical application of all this nutritional data. How do we synthesize this toxicological intelligence into practical, everyday guidelines?
The source material outlines 3 foundational steps to completely overhaul a geriatric dietary regimen. Step 1. Strictly eliminate farm tilapia and Gulf tilefish to avoid those extreme lipid imbalances and mercury spikes. Step 2. Restrict large tuna and swordfish to halt neurotoxic accumulation. And Step 3. Actively integrate therapeutic sources like sardines, Arctic char, and pollock biweekly. This successfully shifts the body's intake from a state of silent pathology to one of active therapy.
Of course, rigorous protocol maintenance is essential here. You want to limit light canned tuna strictly to 1 or 2 times monthly. Always verify the exact origin of unidentified white flaky fish at restaurants so you don't accidentally get exposed to hidden tilefish. Try to leverage the edible bones in sardines for a critical calcium and phosphorus matrix to support structural integrity. And finally, utilize preparation methods like baking or pan-searing to preserve the essential lipid integrity of these therapeutic fish. Following these strict protocols ensures older adults are fueling their physiology with preventative medicine.
The data clearly dictates that cognitive and physical longevity are highly dependent on these precise dietary mechanisms. Continuing to consume pathological vectors dramatically accelerates physiological decline, whereas adopting a targeted therapeutic protocol acts as profound preventative care. Which leaves us with a vital question to consider. How will you implement this physiological intelligence moving forward to ensure long-term health? Thank you for joining us to explore this critical scientific data today.